Whit Sunday 1964. Brighton's seafront is meant to be peaceful, a place of deck chairs, sand, and families enjoying the sun. You're walking along the promenade, ice cream in hand, expecting nothing more than a lazy afternoon. But suddenly the calm shatters. The roar of scooters and motorbikes fills the air. Deck chairs are snatched up and smashed. The promenade transforms into a war zone. Two youth tribes, mods and rockers, are about to carve their names into British history. Today we're diving deep into the clashes that shocked a nation and defined an entire generation. This is the story of the moment when being young, loud, and different was treated like a crime. Whit Sunday 1964. Brighton's seafront is meant to be peaceful, a place of deck chairs, sand, and families enjoying the sun. You're walking along the promenade, ice cream in hand, expecting nothing more than a lazy afternoon. But suddenly the calm shatters. The roar of scooters and motorbikes fills the air. Deck chairs are snatched up and smashed. The promenade transforms into a war zone. Two youth tribes, mods and rockers, are about to carve their names into British history. Today we're diving deep into the clashes that shocked a nation and defined an entire generation. This is the story of the moment when being young, loud, and different was treated like a crime. The rockers. Then came the rockers, though they'd insist they were around first. Heavy British motorbikes, Triumphs, BSAs, leather jackets covered in studs, brill-creamed hair, pure, unapologetic rock and roll. They were the rebels of transport cafes and roadside diners, drinking tea from chipped mugs. Where mods were polished, rockers were gritty. Where mods were stylish, rockers were raw. These weren't just fashion choices. They were two competing visions of what young working-class identity should look like. And increasingly, these two tribes couldn't stand one another. The first spark, Clacton, Easter 1964. The trouble didn't start in Brighton. It began at Clacton during Easter weekend. Cold weather left hundreds of bored teenagers stranded with nothing to do. Minor scuffles turned into fights. Property was damaged. Nothing too serious by today's standards. But the newspapers exploded with outrage. Headlines screamed about rioting hordes, violent youth, and chaos at the seaside. What the press didn't realize was that their exaggeration acted like free advertising. Teenagers reading those headlines thought, "That looks exciting, I'm going next bank holiday." The media didn't calm the situation. They escalated it. Whit Sunday 1964. Brighton becomes a battlefield. Brighton was already a mod stronghold. Convoys of scooters regularly traveled down from London in long mirror-covered lines. But on Whit Sunday 1964, something different happened. Thousands of mods and rockers arrived. Police expected a few hundred at most. They were completely overwhelmed. By Saturday evening, violence erupted. Deck chairs smashed and used as makeshift weapons. Shop windows shattered along the seafront. Gangs chased each other through narrow lanes, across the pier, and over the beach. The noise was unforgettable. Glass breaking, engines roaring, kids screaming, police whistles piercing the chaos. Residents watched in disbelief. This wasn't their Brighton anymore. The Palace Pier flashpoint. The Victorian pier, usually a place for families and couples, turned into a running battleground. Ironically, when the dust settled, the official reports showed that the actual violence was far less dramatic than the headlines claimed. No deaths, mostly minor injuries. Most arrests were for threatening behavior, not assault. But if you saw the newspapers, you'd think Britain was collapsing. The Courtroom crackdown. When the riots ended, another drama began, this time inside the courtroom. Magistrates made it clear they wanted to send a message. Dr. George Simpson in Margate became infamous for his brutal sentencing. He called the youths sawdust Caesars. He lectured them about morality and discipline. He handed out shockingly harsh punishments: months in prison for carrying a penknife, heavy fines teenagers couldn't afford. Parents sat in the gallery confused and embarrassed. These weren't hardened criminals, just working-class kids who got caught up in something bigger than themselves. The trial became a public performance, designed to terrify Britain's youth back into obedience. And of course, the media loved every second of it. The moral panic. 1964 Britain didn't know how to handle its young people. Older generations who lived through the war struggled to understand this new, expressive youth culture. Sociologist Stanley Cohen later called mods and rockers folk devils, easy targets to blame for society's anxieties. Newspapers exaggerated wildly. One claimed Brighton looked like a battlefield with blood on the streets. Another suggested communist agents orchestrated the violence. TV news repeated the same dramatic clips over and over. Reality: a few broken windows, frightened tourists, and a lot of noise. But this is how moral panics work. A small problem occurs. The media magnifies it. Authorities overreact. The panic becomes the real issue. The riots were shaped as much by fear and publicity as by the teenagers themselves, why they hated each other. The rivalry wasn't really about scooters or leather jackets. It was about class, identity, and masculinity. Mods, aspirational, upward-looking, stylish. They wanted to transcend their working-class roots through fashion and culture. Rockers, proudly were practical, tough, traditional. They valued authenticity over appearance. Two mods, rockers, were dinosaurs. Two rockers, mods, were posers. Their fights were clashes between two visions of what it meant to be young and British. The decline of the wars. By 1966, the riots faded away. Police became more prepared. Councils introduced new restrictions. People simply grew up jobs. Families, responsibilities took over. Subcultures evolved into new forms. Mods fragmented into psychedelic hippies, skinheads, or just regular adults with old stories. Rockers blended into wider biker culture. Ironically, the same styles once feared by the nation became celebrated symbols of British pop culture. Museums, fashion designers, filmmakers, everyone now praises the very tribes once demonized. Time turned rebellion into nostalgia. Looking back 6 decades later, so what should we make of the mods and rockers riots today? Were they Britain's wildest youth battles? Or were they exaggerated storms blown up by eager newspapers and nervous politicians? Probably a bit of both. There was real fear, real violence, and real consequences. But there was also enormous exaggeration for the sake of headlines and public morality. These events remind us that every generation builds its own tribes and its own identity crises, and society always has a choice. Understand them, or panic about them. The mods and rockers weren't just fighting each other. They were fighting for space to exist in a changing nation. Those teenagers now in their 70s and 80s probably look back with a mix of embarrassment and pride. They lived fast, they dressed sharp, and they helped create youth culture as we know it. Final question for the viewers. So, what do you think? Were the mods and rockers villains or misunderstood kids? Were they dangerous or simply different? And here's the real question. If you were taking the train down to Brighton in 1964, would you be riding a Vespa in a parka or a roaring Triumph in a leather jacket? Drop your thoughts in the comments. These stories belong to all of us. They shaped the Britain we know today. Until next time, keep the memories alive.